It feels like more and more gamers nowadays are searching for that unquenchable thirst that is realism. They want their worlds to look real, feel real, experience a one-to-one recreation of reality through the guise of a digital lens. But why? Reality is real. I mean, it's just outside. Literally, look out your window, it's right there. Video games, to some, are seen as an escape. Why would I worry about today's problems when I can worry about this little bug dude? Why burden myself with geopolitics when Zelda needs to be saved? Why do we want to return to reality? Realism in video games has always been a very double-edged sword. On one hand, realism can greatly enhance your experience, and on the other, it could be exceedingly detrimental to your enjoyment. Chasing realism for realism's sake can ruin a game just as fast as it can elevate one. So where's the balance? Where do we draw the line, and does it even matter? If you were to categorize what realism is in video games, we could break it down into 4 categories. Visual, photoreal imagery, lighting, textures, and environmental detail. Physical, gravity, damage, movement, and economy. Logical, world rules feel coherent with reality. And believable, stories and situations are grounded in relatable reality. But even still with that definition, what is real? Because here's the problem, realism is a moving target. A game many consider to be one of the greatest of all time is also one of the most realistic worlds ever created in a digital fashion. Rockstar's magnum opus, Red Dead Redemption 2, is the closest we've ever come to a living, breathing world. Visually, the setting is damn near photorealistic, and despite being a richly detailed fictional version of the American frontier, Rockstar managed to blend inspirations from real US geography and history into 5 explorable fictional states. New Hanover captures the feeling of the Great Plains and parts of the Midwest. Amberino reminds us of the harshness of the sweeping Rocky Mountains. Lemoyne makes you want to leave just as quickly as the real Deep South does. West Elizabeth fills us with awe as we look at the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest, and New Austin reminds us of what the dying western frontiers once were. But Red Dead Redemption 2's realism goes beyond just its photorealistic fictional America. The world behaves realistically. Animals will hunt, vultures will circle, testicles will shrink. This game even has a realistic body decomposition mechanic. The physical world is real and logical. Everything about Red Dead Redemption 2 is the gold standard for realism, but it's not perfect. In the novel Red Dead's History, a video game and obsession in America's violent past, Tor C. Olson explains how, despite being accurate in dozens if not hundreds of historical facts, Red Dead 2's inherent flaws lie in its timeline. By placing the game at the turn of the century in 1899, Olson argues Red Dead Redemption 2 is actually 30 years too late for a traditional cowboy/outlaw story. If the setting were moved back 3 decades, that placed the game in circa 1869, better suiting the stylistic and cultural hallmarks of the lawless frontier the plot seems to evoke. There are also various subtle plot points here and there that all thematically make sense within the world, but not historically. Does this fact then negate the realism factor of the game? Or how about the occasional supernatural entities that can be found in the world? The strange man comes to mind instantly. Is he a demon, the devil, an apparition? The strange man is an entity that toes the line between supernatural and cosmic. He's unsettling, omniscient, and doesn't play the same rules as everyone else in Red Dead's grounded world. And yet, he works. Why? Because Red Dead's world is steeped in myth. American frontier legends, tall tales, ghost stories, they're all part of the cultural backdrop. So when a figure like the strange man shows up, he doesn't break the realism, he embodies a different kind of it. He feels like the kind of story somebody in 1899 would tell. He's less a supernatural twist and more an extension of the folklore baked into the game's DNA. This is where realism meets authenticity. Red Dead isn't a literal historical sim, it's a mythic one. It uses real history to tell emotionally true stories that give it the freedom to include figures like the strange man without shattering immersion. So no, technically he doesn't break the realism. He just reveals how flexible realism can be when a world's internal rules are strong enough to hold even the strangest shadows.
Damn you! Yes, many have.
Despite Red Dead's obsessive attention to detail, it's only realistic within its own world. Sure, our real-world history suggests that events of the game wouldn't have happened when they did, but who's to say the internal logic of the Red Dead universe doesn't make it real on its own terms? But if that's the case, then does that make ULTRAKILL any less realistic than Ready or Not? Mankind is dead, blood is fuel. In a world ravaged by an eternal war, all living creatures have been eradicated, with all who remain being machines of war that literally run on blood. With nowhere else to gain a fuel source, the machines find a way into hell, killing demons and using them as fuel. In a world bathed in blood and corruption, the city of Los Sueños stands as the epicenter of it all. Cartels, human trafficking rings, terrorists, government splinter cells, all inhabit the decaying streets, and all that stands in their way is a severely defunded police force. Both games follow the internal logic established for its own world, yet Ready or Not, a tactical shooter, is considered the more real game compared to the retro-styled first-person shooter that is ULTRAKILL. So again, what really makes a game real? Is it guns sounding accurate? AI movement mimicking real SWAT teams? Or is it the emotional response a game pulls out of you when everything clicks? The tension, the stakes, or the atmosphere? Ready or Not gets praised for its realism because it feels like something grounded in our reality. Police breaching doors, high-stakes hostage situations, real-world gear and tactics. It wears the skin of reality and lets your brain do the rest. ULTRAKILL, on the other hand, is fast, bloody, absurd, and unapologetically over the top.
I will grind you down until the very sparks cry for mercy! My hands shall relish ending you here and now!
But within its world, it's airtight. The world has logic. Blood is fuel, violence is survival, and that consistency gives it a weird kind of realism. Not in the one-to-one simulation of Earth sense, but in the this world makes sense and behaves how it should sense. I mean, if we really want to get into semantics, the machines that run on blood, technically they're science fact. There was a real DARPA project proposal for a machine that could run on bioorganic fuel. And visually, ULTRAKILL's low-res aesthetic, that's not just a stylistic choice. It's justified in lore. According to an in-game terminal, most machines will only render a simplified approximation of their visual surroundings for faster processing speed. So really, we're not seeing a pixelated game world, we're seeing V1's internal rendering of it. So if you want to get really technical, the only non-realistic thing about ULTRAKILL is the machine's descent into hell. So now we're not just talking about realism in the traditional sense, we're talking about authenticity, internal truth, cohesion. A game doesn't have to mirror reality to feel real, it just has to follow its own rules. A game that I consider to be one of the most realistic games to have ever been made is Project Zomboid. Visually, the game looks nowhere near the photorealistic quality of Red Dead. Narratively, it's a game about zombies, but mechanically, it's second to none. Place yourself in the shoes of the survivor. A zombie is chasing you. You're running, looking for a way out. The walls are closing in, hope is leaving you. Then you see it, a window. Closed, but if you break it, then maybe you can lose the zombie on the other side. You rush to the window, smash it with whatever you have, and jump in. Stupidly, you didn't clear the glass before doing so, and now you're wounded with a deep cut stuck full of glass. Oh, and the zombie got you, too. That is a real thing that happens in Project Zomboid, all the time. You literally need to do that in order to not hurt yourself. Better yet, how would you avoid being bitten by a zombie? More clothes, cover the skin. Better yet, patch existing clothes with leather or toughened materials to increase your chances of survival. You can do that too. In the world of Project Zomboid, death is as much a mechanic as it is in the Souls series. With each run, you learn a little bit more. Don't run too much. Monitor your food supplies. If you're injured, disinfect. If it's a deep wound, sew it up. Want to get better at something? Do it more to increase your skills. Getting exhausted too quickly? Work out. Do some cardio. The more you play the game, the more you realize just how close the internal logic of the world is closely related to our own. You know, save for the zombies. This is the first game I have ever played where my character can get bored. Seriously, standing idle is a staple in literally every game that gives you a controllable character. Not moving, not doing anything isn't going to affect your character. Yet apply that to a real-world scenario and you'll quickly be faced with boredom. Obviously, I can't let my character sit in a broom closet for 6 hours with nothing to do while I wait for nightfall to sneak past the zombies easier. They'll need something to do in the meantime, or else they'll get bored. And in this world, a world plagued by hordes of the undead, boredom can let the mind wander. And when it wanders too far, dark thoughts can seep in. Project Zomboid, despite its unassuming appearance, is truly one of the most realistic games I have ever played. That's because it's function over flair, and once you're in it, The aesthetic hits exactly how it should. Gritty, minimal, and brutally immersive. Maybe realism in gaming is less about narrative accuracy and more about mechanical accuracy. If that is the case, then Microsoft Flight Simulator would be the gold standard of realism. This is a game that doesn't care if you're having fun in the traditional sense. It cares if you're flying a plane correctly. From fuel mixture to wind resistance to the curvature of the goddamn Earth, it exists almost entirely to simulate real-world aviation. And it does so better than anything else. I mean, I had to watch a tutorial just to learn how to fly the plane. But the interesting thing is, most people who play flight sims aren't pilots. They're not flying because it's exciting or cinematic. They're flying because it's immersive through precision. In that way, realism becomes a kind of discipline, a test of patience, of learning, of control. This kind of realism isn't about emotional resonance or storytelling. It's about fidelity. Fidelity to the physical systems, controls, and real-world procedures. And there's an audience that thrives on that. Sometimes, realism means slowing things way down. Take Farming Simulator. On paper, it sounds like the world's most boring game. You plant crops, harvest them, manage tractors and crop yields. But to the people who play it, it's zen. It's real. Every piece of equipment behaves the way it should. Soil type matters, weather matters, your workflow matters. There's no story, no cutscenes, just the quiet satisfaction of doing a job right. Same goes for Euro Truck Simulator or American Truck Simulator. These games don't simulate driving fast, they simulate driving long. Long, winding, uneventful highways, fuel stops, sleep cycles, turning radii, backing into tight loading docks. You're not racing, you are literally working. And there's something bizarrely therapeutic about that. Then you've got Power Wash Simulator, which might be the purest example of mechanical realism meeting simple joy. There are no enemies and no stakes, just a dirty house, a high-pressured hose, and your own obsession with perfection. It replicates the texture of reality, not through visuals, but through behavior. Water arcs realistically, dirt clings stubbornly. The satisfaction doesn't come from winning, it comes from cleaning. These games prove that realism isn't always about tension or danger. Sometimes it's about process, doing a task the right way, understanding how things work, experiencing the rhythms of jobs most people overlook in real life but somehow crave in the virtual one. Because maybe that's the real twist. Realism in games isn't about replicating reality, it's about giving meaning to it. And few games embody that more than the Arma series. On the surface, Arma is a clunky, janky military sim with awkward controls, dense UIs, and some of the slowest pacing in gaming. It's a game where running across an open field takes actual minutes, where you can die without ever seeing your enemy, and where even simple actions, like switching weapons or giving a command, require memorizing keybinds like you're cramming for a flight exam. But that's the point. Arma doesn't care about you feeling like a badass. It wants you to feel like a cog in the machine, a soldier, a squad mate, someone with a job to do in a larger complex system. And the magic of Arma isn't in its systems alone. It's in what players do with them. Entire communities have turned Arma into a platform for emergent storytelling, role-playing, and large-scale cooperative operations that feel more real than the most scripted shooters ever could. We're talking about 50, 60, 100-player ops where squads communicate via actual military callouts, commanders plan logistics, and where medics patch people up while under fire. It's chaotic, it's overwhelming, it's not streamlined or convenient, but it feels real because it operates with the same logic, stakes, and friction that real combat does. You are never going to be a hero in any Arma game. You are just part of the machine. And it's in that revolutionary buy-in, that shared suspension of disbelief, where realism becomes something more than a checklist of physics and ballistics. It becomes a shared experience. A simulated one, yes, but no less real to the people playing it. So again, realism isn't about a one-to-one replication. It's about friction, consequence, context. Games like Arma let us inhabit roles we could never experience in real life, not by handing us power, but by forcing us to earn it, understand it, and operate within its limits. But here's the thing, that level of realism isn't always good game design, because in the pursuit of authenticity, you sometimes lose accessibility, engagement, and most importantly, fun. So even if a game nails every bit of realism, physics, AI, world design, literally everything realistic down to a T, then you're forgetting the most important part of a video game, the fun factor. But by introducing the fun factor to games, it creates a new paradox. Ludonarrative dissonance. Yeah, I know it's a big, ugly word that sounds like something a game design professor would yell at undergrads, so let's break it down. Ludonarrative dissonance is a fancy term made up of 3 parts. Ludo means game or play, narrative is the plot, characters, and themes the game is trying to tell, and dissonance means conflict or clashing. Put it all together, and ludonarrative dissonance is what happens when the gameplay tells one story, but the narrative tells another. If you need a prime example of ludonarrative dissonance in play, look no further than The Last of Us Part 2. At its core, The Last of Us Part 2 isn't just a story about revenge. It's a tragic, deeply human story about grief, forgiveness, and emotional avoidance. While revenge is the engine driving the plot, the emotional undercurrent is Ellie's journey through loss and self-denial. Revenge becomes her coping mechanism, her way of avoiding the real pain, the unresolved guilt, and love she had for Joel. The game's brutal cycle of violence. Joel kills Abby's father, Abby kills Joel, Ellie kills Abby's friends, etc. mirrors the quote, "Death begets death. Evil begets evil." It's a loop where no one escapes unscathed. However, the true emotional climax isn't in Ellie killing Abby, but in her choosing not to. It's Ellie choosing to break the cycle and finally face her trauma head on. While the story is phenomenal in its own right, and to be honest, one of my favorite stories in gaming, there is a major disconnect with the story and the gameplay. The narrative is begging you to feel the weight of each death, to reflect on the cost of revenge and the humanity of your enemies. The gameplay, however, is constantly funneling you into combat scenarios where killing isn't just encouraged, it's rewarded. You'll mow through dozens of enemies, many of whom are given names and personalities to make them feel more real.
Don't.
Okay.
It's Colin! Oh no, what? What? Someone took him out!
It doesn't matter how emotionally drained Ellie is. Once you're holding the controller, she's a stealth-killing machine with upgraded weapons and a kill count that rivals Rambo and John Wick. And this is where ludonarrative dissonance hits the hardest. The story of The Last of Us Part 2 wants to say violence is destructive. However, the video game The Last of Us Part 2 wants to say violence is fun. It creates a weird emotional tug of war. You're being told to feel remorse for your actions right after you were just rewarded for pulling off a clean headshot. Now, that doesn't mean The Last of Us Part 2 fails. In fact, some can argue this dissonance is the point, that you're supposed to feel uncomfortable with the violence, but it's still a textbook case of how realism and storytelling can butt heads with gameplay systems if they're not fully aligned. Then there's Uncharted, a game that never pretends to be realistic but still deals with the same contradiction. Nathan Drake is a wisecracking treasure hunter who casually racks up a body count in the hundreds. The devs even admitted the red damage screen isn't blood. It's his luck running out, which is a clever fix for sure, but it's also proof that sometimes realism takes a backseat to tone. But it also highlights how developers sometimes have to rewrite the rules just to make the gameplay and story stop fighting each other. If that is indeed the case, then does this simply imply that games which focus more on their narratives have to put realism on hold when gameplay kicks in? It's a tough pill to swallow, but often, yes, because gameplay is interactive. It demands player agency, pacing, and above all else, fun. The story wants to make you feel something deep and nuanced, but the gameplay wants you to do something that feels satisfying, responsive, and sometimes even empowering. These goals don't always line up. Developers find themselves walking a tightrope between dramatic storytelling and engaging mechanics. They have to ask, how much can we realistically simulate without losing players to frustration or boredom? When does realism enhance immersion? And when does it become a roadblock? Other games lean fully into simulation, sacrificing cinematic polish or accessibility for mechanical depth. This can create niche, passionate communities, but it limits the broader appeal. The truth is, realism in games isn't a switch you just flip on and off. It's a spectrum, and every game has its own balance somewhere along that line. Which brings us back to the paradox, the fun factor. Because no matter how realistic the world, how nuanced the narrative, or how precise the mechanics, if the game isn't fun, or at least compelling in its own way, players won't stick around long enough to experience any of it. So maybe the real question isn't how realistic a game can be, but how realism serves the game's unique goals. Because at the end of the day, games don't have to feel real, they just have to feel right.